First of all, I'd like to thank KDI for inviting me, and I'd like to congratulate San Hoon and Professor Lee and his colleagues for putting together this wonderful conference. Okay, this paper is about foreign patenting surge in China. Let me first show you a table that compares and contrasts patent applications at the Chinese Patent Office and the U.S. Patent Office. So for the China Patent Office patents, there are two kinds here. There's the invention patents, the utility models. And I'm comparing the growth rates of the major applicants at these two patent offices. And of course, the most striking feature of the table is that the growth rate of patent applications, the Chinese Patent Office, extremely high and much higher than those at the U.S. Patent Office. My micro-level data stopped in the year 2004, so that's why where I stopped with this table. But I can assure you that this trends continued even to this day. One thing that you should know about this table is that, and also with the fact that over 90% of foreign applications of Chinese patents have foreign priority. So which means that these are actually applications for Chinese patents that are based on earlier applications filed with the Foreign Patent Office. So the sharp difference between the two kind of growth rates says that the surge in the patent application Chinese Patent Office obviously cannot be driven by higher knowledge production in these economies at home, but rather it must be that these economies have increased their propensity to patent in China. So that's what this paper is trying to understand. In particular, I'm trying to examine two potential hypotheses that I propose might explain the China's foreign patenting surge. That is, what explain such enthusiasm from foreign inventors for Chinese patents when the general perception is that IP protection is rather weak in China and enforcement of IP is weak in China. The first hypothesis is what I call the market covering hypothesis. Obviously, as foreign firms deepen and broaden their engagement with the Chinese economy, that increases the risk of exposing their IP to a potential imitation. So obviously, when whether it's through FDI or trade, as foreign firms deepen their engagement, the returns to protect IP and patent rights, in particular, increase. The other potential explanation is what I call the competitive threat hypothesis. As Chinese firms' capability to imitate foreign technology grows, and as competition between foreign firms in the Chinese market intensifies, obviously the incentive to try to block competition, to block entry by these foreign companies also increased. And I think the two potential hypotheses have different reference implications, if you will. The market hypothesis is, I think, related to because if you think about more patent applications in China, it could represent two things. One is that there's more deployment of foreign technologies in China, and the other is that the patenting is really for the purpose of, for the strategic reasons for blocking entry and competition. So I think the market covering hypothesis is more related to the issue of deploying technology deployment, whereas the competitive threat hypothesis is more related to strategic reasons to block competition. And if it's the latter, then I think the more one should interpret these patent surge as more as indicating more of blocking of diffusion rather than more deployment technology. A brief introduction to the Chinese patent system. I'll go through this very quickly. China reinstituted patent law in 1985, and the law was substantially amended twice in 1993 and then in 2001. And I think the end result was that these amendments brought Chinese patent law legislation largely in line with international norms, and they granted these three types of patents or industrial IPs, if you will: invention, utility model, and designs. And this relates to earlier presentations about Latin American countries that Fabio talked about in the morning. In China, the proportion of individual patents is about 1/3 versus 17% for the data I have of the U.S. Patent Office patents. And as I mentioned earlier, these foreign applications, they represent 2/3 of the total invention patent applications, and 90% of these have foreign priority. So in order to investigate the two hypotheses, what I do is that I sort of combine and match two patent databases. The first consists of all the patent applications filed with Chinese Patent Office from the year the law was reinstituted to 2004. These included around 216,000 invention patents and around 700,000 utility model patents, and the U.S. PTO patents. Of course, the challenge of using these patent applications data, the patent level information, is that it is not clear that there's no natural assignment of these patents to industries where the most economic data are collected, at which level the most economic data are collected. So there are various routes that people have taken to try to make use of patent data, try to relate that to these economic variables. I think Bronwyn and her colleagues at NBER, what they're doing is to match these to the U.S. CompuStat data using, going through this laborious process of matching firm-level information. The route I'm taking here is to use this technology concordance. In particular, I use this what was originally the Yale Technology Concordance. I think this is probably familiar with, most people in this room are familiar with this concordance, so I won't spend too much time on this. Essentially, it makes use of the expertise and judgment of the Canadian Patent Office, which for a certain period of time, in a time span of around 20 years, assign both the IPC class and industry manufacturing sector use for each of these 300,000 patents. On the assumption that their judgment is correct, on the assumption that these relationship between patent class and industry classification, these relationships are stable over time and invariant across countries, then you can use this information to construct a matrix of probabilities that would assign patents that belong to a certain IPC class to industries. And the particular technology concordance I use in this paper is this so-called OECD technology concordance. Basically, it adds another layer of translation from the SIC code to ISIC code. So this gives you an idea of, this compares sort of the industry, after I have done the assignment of patents to these industries, this figure gives you sort of an industry distribution of these patents across this mix of 2, 3, and 4-digit industries. And broadly, the patterns of distribution are quite similar between the Chinese Patent Office patents and the US PTO patents. Essentially, the top patent industries are the machinery industries, telecommunications, pharmaceutical chemicals, and office computing and pharmaceuticals. And these top 4 patent industries in both patent office account for somewhere between 50 to 60% of all the patent applications. So to try to understand, what is really behind this foreign patenting surge in China, I'm hypothesizing that so the patenting decision made by a foreign inventor in China obviously depends on the amount of knowledge created by these inventors at home, right? So, and then part of that knowledge is patentable. So the amount of patent knowledge is subject to a propensity patent parameter. And then there's propensity patent in China. So basically what I do here is that using this information of industry concordance as well as the patent class information, so the data I have 4 dimensions. You have countries where the inventors come from, and industries where they are from, and the patent classes that those patents belong to, and the year. So basically, I use, for lack of a better proxy, I use these foreign countries' U.S. PTO patents as a proxy for the amount of patentable knowledge created in a certain patent class of certain industry for a certain country in a given year. And then, so to use that to control for the amount of patent knowledge and use these other variables to try to capture the interaction in terms of between these countries and industries in terms of the propensity patent in China. So so this is sort of first. Let's try to get a first pass look at how the countries interact in their propensity patent in China. So you have, for example, a country K's Chinese patent applications in industry I and patent class J in year T. And that is related to these are the country's U.S. PTO patents in that year, in that industry, in that patent class, and their other countries' Chinese patent office patents. And here, this one is the China's utility models, right? And also I include here a whole bunch of fixed effects. So these are the industry fixed effects, the year fixed effects, and the interaction, the full sort of cross product of the set of industry effect and year effects. And the way I can do that is because I have this extra layer of variation that is created by these patent classes within each industry. So I'm doing this for all these top patent applicants in China. Plus, I also do this for 2 types of Chinese patents: Chinese invention patents and Chinese utility model patents. Given there are obvious lingering concerns about causality, so I'm really taking these to reflect partial correlations rather than making sort of causal inference from this. So instead of going through all these numbers, which there are a lot of, let me just summarize what these numbers sort of, at least the way I read these numbers. I think what these estimates show is that, first of all, it seems like the Chinese invention and utility model patents track those of Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. That is, the large and significant partial correlations, but not those of America and Germany. So there are these cross-country differences. And also Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, they seem to patent in similar industries in Chinese Patent Office, whereas US and Germany tend to be closer to each other. And so what do we make of, so clearly, countries, there's some sort of interaction between these countries in making their patenting decisions in the Chinese Patent Office. So I guess there are 2 potential ways to make sense of these correlations. One is that this seems to be consistent with the kind of the pattern of economic integration that we are observing in East Asia. China is obviously running a huge trade surplus with the U.S., but China is actually running a huge trade deficit with Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, largely because China imports a lot of capital equipment and intermediate materials from these countries. So this would argue that these economies, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, would have great incentive to take out patents to protect the IP embodied in their capital equipment and intermediate inputs. And another interpretation is sort of the appropriate technology and absorptive capacity interpretation, which is that perhaps given the Chinese firms' technological capabilities, they're better able to absorb and adapt, imitate the technologies from Korea, Taiwan, and to some extent Japan than those technologies originated from US and Germany, which is another interpretation. And again, this is just, I'm using this as a way to motivate the differentiation of the two hypotheses that I raised at the beginning. So here's how I'm trying to differentiate this competitive threat hypothesis from the market covering hypothesis. Basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to relate patent applications to competition between foreign firms in China using import data to construct a competing competition measure. So I have two competing imports measured here. The first one is, CI, so this is the competitive imports. Facing country K importing goods in industry J in year T to China. Right, so this is foreign exports to China, or China's imports from country K in industry J. And so it's a weighted sum of all the China's imports from all these foreign countries, with the weights being the technology proximity between country K and these other countries. So I use the patent information to construct this technology proximity measure. The idea is that if two industries from two countries they compete in China, same industry, but the extent that they are competing at a product level may be quite different. And the assumption here is that this technology proximity measure counts for that. So the more the extent to which the two countries overlap in their technology classes, the more likely that they'll compete against each other. The other is what they call the sort of a naive measure of competing imports, which is basically a simple sum of all the other foreign countries' exports to China. And here's the equations I'm trying to estimate. So this would be country K's industry J from country K's application for Chinese patents in year T, and that I relate that to this particular country's own export to the Chinese market, or import of China from country K industry J in year T, and plus this competing imports measure, and also control for this country, this industry, and from this country's application for U.S. PTO patents, as control for the amount of new knowledge created by that country. And as well as the Chinese, so all these Ks are for foreign countries. So I'm also trying to see whether their applications are also, in addition to competition from other foreign countries, I'm also looking at whether they are reacting to the patenting decisions made by the Chinese firms. So this is the Chinese invention patents, and this is the Chinese utility models. Okay, here's something about the import data. I think I'll just skip this. Basically, I use this World Bank Trade Production and Protection Database that provides this bilateral trade data at the 3-digit ISIC level. This table shows the main results. So I attempted 3 different kinds of estimators, the OLS, fixed effect, and system GMM. So basically, the even-numbered columns are my preferred specification, where I use this competing imports, where the odd-numbered columns use the naive measures. So you see here is that the competing import measure always comes up positive and highly significant, and whereas the naive measure is either insignificant or the wrong side. So if we can just focus on the last column, which is the sort of preferred specification, what you see here is that there's so these are all elasticity. So there's a positive significant correlation between competing imports and a foreign industry's applications for Chinese patents. But the only import effect is marginally significant and negative. The way I interpret that is that now having control for the degree of competition in a particular industry, obviously the higher your sales Chinese market indicates that the more market power you have, and that might be related to this idea of market expansion, market power that Walter talked about in the morning. That is, you might not want to fire as many applications given that you have higher market power. For to save space, I didn't reproduce some of the test statistics that I did for the system GMN. I think for the preferred specification, they all the AR1, AR2 statistics are all reasonable, and the Sargent test also is all right. So to summarize, this competing import seems to have a positive and robust effect on the foreign industry's Chinese patenting, and controlling for competing imports, foreign industries export China has a negative effect on its Chinese patenting. And the foreign patenting, I didn't really get to discuss just now, was that another thing is that the foreign patenting reacts to Chinese invention patents, but not to utility model patents, which seem to suggest that to think that the utility model patent, the Chinese may use utility model patents to exploit the as a way to exploit loopholes in the patent system, doesn't seem to receive our support in here. But they do seem to react to the increase in Chinese invention patents. So to conclude, so here's some of the lessons that I've learned from this exercise. First of all, I think that patents taken out by different countries in China seem to be correlated beyond what technology opportunity and the changes in macroeconomic environment would predict, because there are these correlations even after you control for technology opportunity, after you control for these macro shocks, whether at the country level, at the industry level. Even when you control for that, there seems to be still some correlation there, and that pattern of correlation seems to be consistent with the pattern of China's trade and foreign direct investment relations with these countries. And also, if we take the point estimates that I show you in the last table, it would seem that this competition between foreign industries in the Chinese market can explain a fairly significant portion of China's foreign patent surge. I just use those point of estimates. The proportion ranges from 21 to 36% of China's foreign patent surge. So going back to the issue of what differentiating these two hypotheses, I think this sort of gives more support to the competitive threat hypothesis. And of course, I don't want to be because I think there's still some issues in terms of whether one can just jump from here to the conclusion that a lot of this foreign patent in China is for strategic reasons to block either entry or competition from other foreign firms or Chinese firms. But it does seem to suggest that given that controlling for foreign competition, the own sales or export to China doesn't seem to have a whole lot of expanding power of their patents in China. This does seem to suggest that it sort of favors this competitive threat or strategic motivation rather than the technology deployment motivation. Okay, I think that's it.